millennium, humanity has lived among the stars in darkness. Humans reached the stars long ago, building a republic of high technology and universal emancipation. Then they fought over it, squandered it, and finally lost it. Now a new dark age has descended upon humanity. For the greatest of civilizations has fallen.
Oh, there I am. Great Pilgrim, DC.
Ignorance and fear scattered among the ruins of many worlds. Even the stars are dying. Then from the ashes of our ruin, Vladimir halted our decline. Proclaimed emperor by popular decree, he united the known worlds of human space under his cunning and charismatic rule. Vladimir created the Great Charter, declaring how the powers of rulership would be divided and how his successors would be elected. 5 scepters from Mother Church, protector of our souls. 5 for the Merchant League, heralds of our past. 5 for the noble houses, holders of our future. But each of these powers wished to rule it in their own way.
So because I find the time delay distracting, I basically cover my Twitch just so I can see the chat, but I can't see the actual screen.
So they could not stand in battle before this master tactician. The Merchant League, last remnants of the Second Republic,
that's a good idea.
Disdain for the charter of Vladimir, but they accepted his rule nonetheless. Fearful of his popularity among the people, the Patriarch of the Universal Church accepted Vladimir's rule on the condition that the Church present him the crown, thus ensuring their ritual role in approving all his successors. Vladimir's coronation as the first emperor of the known worlds took place on Byzantium Secundus, which had been declared the imperial throne world.
Good, now I'm only listening to this guy.
In the year 4550 AD, Vladimir crowned himself with his own hands and died. An agonizing death at the hand of unknown powers. With Vladimir's death, his great union fell apart. Noble house turned on noble house, igniting a war for the spoils of Vladimir's empire. The commonwealth of humanity was shattered, overcome by iron-fisted feudal lords. As the suns fade, so dies humanity's hope.
And with that, the suns fade, never to return. Oh, wait! Maybe they will. Depends which heretical doctrine you follow. Here to share their heretical doctrines with us are, of course, we have... Let's see if it's on. Yes, on your left, we have the ghost himself of Hezekiah the Elder.
Greetings, my children. They say I'm dead, but I'm only theologically dead.
To the lower right, Saint Hieronymus the Unmentionable. And, of course, above them, the patriarch himself, not, as some have assumed, the prophet Zebulon. But all of them, of course, bring the true knowledge of the Empyrean and all the holy realms, and it will never conflict with any other description. It will always be true, no matter how much it conflicts. So welcome, and please introduce yourself, starting with the ghost of Hezekiah the Elder. Hezekiah the Elder, goodness gracious.
Hezekiah, yeah. Rustin Quaid here. Hello.
What did you write in the old Fading Suns books?
I wrote the Old Voldrock, I wrote the Amaltheans, Lethalon, Amelie, other materials too. So I had a lot.
You were all over the place.
Yeah, you work hard.
Yeah.
And Saint Hieronymus the Unmentionable.
Hello, James Estes here. I worked on the original write-up for the Eschatonics, for the Ur Obun, for the planet Pentateuch. Did I miss anything? I think that was it. All the fun stuff. Oh, the Ducados.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about them.
way back when.
And you did work on some other games with a little bit of a religious nature to them over the years.
Yeah.
And on the top, we have... Introduce yourselves.
Bill Bridges running this whole show. Not this one. Andrew running this one. Just all that text stuff you're hopefully all buying with the current Kickstarter.
And the Princess Aurora has asked to join us for 1 minute.
Sure.
Oh,
give you your blessings.
wow.
And,
I'm trying to get this card.
yes. So, sorry, we're having trouble with the male owls.
You're live.
Yes, you're on. We're talking to lots of people right now, Princess Aurora. Can you say hello to everybody? Thank you very much, Princess Aurora. This is about everyone's holy souls. So, we'll begin. We were talking the other day about the role religion has played in science fiction over the years, and how it's been instrumental to pretty much everything in science fiction, right? How every science fiction writer has paid it close attention and involved it in every way possible. Yeah, okay. Certainly not.
Well, the thing is, a lot of people try to ignore it in science fiction, I think, and that's the thing. A lot of the classic authors did a lot of it, but more and more, I think people try to ignore it, and Fading Suns doesn't. Anybody got opinions on that?
Are we anybody's, or are we waiting for people to like?
You're anybody's. Let's start with you guys, and we'll see what people start asking, if anything.
So one of the things with Fading Suns, because we were taking influences from so many different places, one of the central themes to us was, what would religion look like far, far in the future? And we're talking farther in the future than we are now from the birth of Jesus. So what role would religion play? What sort of part of human life would it take? So we dug both for some of the older forms and for some new ones as well. So you can certainly talk a little bit about similarities to existing religions with things like confession and the idea of the spirit, but it also involves humanity's place in the universe. So Bill, you want to give a little bit of background first into the history of the Orthodox Church?
Well, it all starts with Zebulon the prophet. Some dude, wandering around space, and he saw this fire on a planet somewhere, and then went around ranting about it, and people started believing him. And, a church came out of it and everything. It's all crazy, What the heck is that all about? But no, the prophet saw the holy flame on the planet of Yathrib, and had a revelation about what... Yep, now lost world, yep. Off of Alon, but the jump gate is closed. Who knows what's going on Yathrib now that it's been closed for many centuries now. And, he went around doing miraculous deeds, which is why it's called the Age of Miracles in Fading Suns. And from out of his deeds and stories and tales, they built a church. At least Patriarch Palamedes Electo did, and other people followed him. And so part of the idea was humanity spreading out. They're doing all sorts of weird experiments in different societies, and sometimes recapitulating the past and creating noble houses all over again. And there are other religions at the time, but we don't remember much of them nowadays because they've all been lost in that pre-reflective past.
One survived. Zeranists still survive.
Oh yeah, the children of Zeron are still there, and so are the Gyartans.
Yeah.
But they're not as powerful or in any way widespread and stuff. They're allowed to kind of keep going because people kind of like them.
There's a lot of interest in chat for the various heresies, of course. So and Path have already popped up into that. Chainsaw Gothic says, "Hot take: I sometimes run stories that play up the guilds and play down the church. Heresy."
Oh, that's Brian and his heresies. I can see that right now. Yes, there are some people who are crazy people who don't buy into this whole church thing. They're called Republicans. And if you ever see one, run as fast as you can.
Yes,
Republicans. And I don't mean the GOP. I mean the Republicans.
Yeah, these Republicans have Democratic tendencies. They're actually Democratic Republicans. But,
yep.
Well, certainly I think that you can create many stories in which religion isn't front and center. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be there, but it's part of the. It's essential to the backdrop. It's part of the world. I mean, it's kind of like, imagine telling stories about the pandemic in the United States today, and you're focusing on science and social distancing, and people are doing. You can't tell the full story without talking about the religious groups on the margins and the things they're doing and how is that influencing. I mean, it's there. You don't have to make it front and center. You can if that's what you want to do, but it's there, and you do the story a disservice if you pretend that there's nothing there.
Right.
So apparently we have
and for all the what's that?
We have a representative from the Caliphate in chat saying lies, lies. Only the Caliphate retains the seal of prophecy.
Oh, the Hazard will get to you soon. They'll handle all that.
But
I do want to just make the point, too, that for all we talk about religion and the orthodoxy and fading suns and stuff, there are obviously, of course, still people who don't buy into this fully. They kind of pretend to because there's some social pressure. But if you go to worlds like Leagueheim, which is the main Merchant League planet, you'll find all sorts of hotbeds of atheists and folks who just don't pay much attention to this stuff or who have their own crazy, almost religious ideas about technology. So, it is a science fiction game, so no one, people can have all sorts of things going on in here. So if you do want to play the game and, have a bunch of people who don't buy into this whole oppressive church stuff, go ahead, play the guilds and, fight against this sort of thing. Good luck, though.
I can't. Go ahead.
One of the fun things we had designing this was that we looked at two stages of humanity's spiritual growth. One was the diaspora, way before the time when the game is set, when humans blast out to space, numerous directions, lots of planets, and all these various religions pop up. Various religions flee, just like we had in the United States history. Religions flee to the U.S. in order to practice safe from any sort of oppression, and kind of interesting to think about the oppressions that the First Republican kind of had the religion of the First Republic in place would have put in place. So you suddenly had this great renewal, but of many, many different beliefs. And now in the Fading Suns era, you have one universal church, which proclaims itself the one and true church that everyone follows the same way. But really, you get on to certain planets, in each fiefdom you might find a different way of practicing it, even though it is led by the official representative of the church. So I like to...
Yeah, there are all sorts of local ways of approaching these things, and as orthodox as the orthodoxy wants to be, they can't enforce a complete, standard across all the worlds, because the Lihalan worlds are different from the Al-Malik worlds, from the Dakados worlds, and so on. So there's lots of variance in local practice and, thought, but they do try to keep, certain scriptural ideas across the board, but they can't control it all.
And that pretty much that comports with our real world history. I mean, in my other life, I do medieval studies and history, and we talk not about medieval Christianity, what we do, but we talk about Christianities. What does it mean to be a Christian in 10th century England versus 13th century France, versus 4th century Rome? You have the different cultural and historic eras that you have a church, but you have different manifestations. So take it out thousands of years in the future and bazillion space units distance.
Space
notice, astrophysics, not my thing. So far away from each other.
And one of the fun things about the new edition of Fading Suns is now humanity is interacting on Hargard with all these different thoughts and ways, and with the Voldrak themselves. So what can we expect to see from the Voldrak, ghost of Hezekiah the Elder?
Well, you will see some that probably welcome the Imperial presence because it's their chance to advance or to sign on with a real powerful guy. Some real resistance, like, what the hell is this guy doing here? These are all worlds where our codes are pretty much, freedom of whatever is in their code. They resist authority, probably to their detriment in many ways. They don't really they had one king over the Voldrak worlds at one time, and they sort of they had a whole all-thing meeting where they were never pledged to one king again. So they're very sort of independent-minded to warlords and thanes and what have you. And I don't know how their religion is going to clash with the religion of the universal fading suns, the known worlds coming in, but it will be interesting to see. And you also have a third factor in Hargard, which is sort of this neo-Hinduism in the southern continent, which what the Ramakrishna dynasty has, which is sort of taken off its own. It's sort of on its own trajectory, but it's evolved into its own thing. Very sophisticated in many ways, but there are rural aspects too that we might call primitive, but it's not in any way primitive. So, so a lot going on in Hargard.
And Hargard, we should mention, is one of the big new settings for the new core book, whereas the previous editions had Pandemonium. The new one has Hargard, and this is amidst where the Imperial powers are coming in now, that Alexius claims the world through his marriage to Freya Eldred's daughter. And so Eldred, who was a Thane previously, is now the head of a minor house in the known worlds. She's been, in a sense, granted that in return for all these lands. And as you say, the Ramakrishna, who helped actually arrange the marriage, have also been granted recognition as a house. So you could play characters from House Ramakrishna or House Eldred if you get the faction book.
So those will all be having Inquisitors in the party too, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. They're people have to play nice for now because this is a new, Imperial arrangement. But obviously, not everyone will. So, we'll see what happens there.
We've been having.
There was a question here I want to answer because it was about the Voldrak and traditionalist Ukar and how we going to be handling those. And Russ just mentioned some of the stuff with the Voldrak, and we'll be getting into more detail about their religion Erdgeist and how it might, or most probably might not, fit into the church. If you remember the history of the church itself, there were a lot of years of struggle to get most of these sects and orders to be recognized as official by the church. And the Orthodoxy will fight any such attempts again, but, it's possible, who knows, some years down the line we might have some reconciliation by recognizing some of these Voldrak, as long as they recognize the Pan Creator as number one. But, we'll see where all that goes to. But as for the Ukar, eventually we'll get into the details on the Ukar again. But traditionalist Ukar are such a minority, and they're mainly on core death, that it just there's so much space in a core book, you can't fit them all in. So we're assuming that most characters in the core books are going to be roaming the known worlds and probably following the mainstream to a certain degree. But we'll get into all these details eventually.
So MC Ultra makes a very good point that sometimes organized religion adopts the native practices to convert the locals. In Fading Suns, though, we had two books called the Star Crusade, or we had a book called the Star Crusade, talking specifically about how the known worlds were dealing with Voldrak space and the Caliphate. Now it's gone from Crusade to, I don't know, how would you describe the mood of the church when it comes to Hargard?
Well, they have to be open. This is a new opportunity as missionaries to gain converts. And obviously, anytime that happens, you're going to have different opinions on it. One who want to convert by sword, and the others who want to convert by book and by word. And right now, at least within the lands of Eldred and so forth, which are the imperial lands now, they have to really be nice. No sword. But then there's the whole other continent on Hargard that's kind of holding out against the Empire. And that might wind up a little different. Some of those people might want to come over, some might not. Russ might have some interesting things to say about that, being he's written a lot of it.
Well, there are, interestingly enough, on that continent, I think it's Ostmark, is
Yes.
sort of resisting the imperial presence. There is a very small sect of sort of a universal church sect there that was cut off. It was brought in by slaves from the known worlds. In the very southern part of that, there's a very small community of worshipers. They've been severed from the main universal church. I imagine there'll be probably talks of reconciliation. Probably most will go along and some won't, but who knows? That's just a very small little detail. On Ostmark itself, I think it's Thane. Is it Six Father Firestorm? I think that's the guy's name.
Yep, that's him.
Now he's old, he's blind, but he's bitter, and he's going to go down fighting. He has two sons. The elder one's not terribly bright. The younger one sort of, I think, sees the future. And, I think from the Emperor's point of view, if the younger one takes over, there might be some chance to avoid war. If the older one takes over upon the father's death, he's just too stupid at peace. He couldn't. I don't know how to say it. He's just not a bright guy.
But that whole area was just a cover for demon worshippers anyway, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Now we had this one comment in chat from some cheeseball named Great Pilgrim DC. Anyone on the call want to dig into that idea a little more?
Yeah. So that's the thing, is that for a while, in scholarship at least, well, actually, it's still ongoing for many people. There's this notion that religion must be a religion must be A, or it must be B. The people of a place must follow this faith or this faith. And so when you see texts or practices that reveal signs of both, there are sometimes arguments in scholarship. Well, which is it? Is it A or is it B? Is it one disguised as the other? A common thing, for example, that you would find going through English literature is Beowulf a Christian text in pagan language or a pagan text in Christian language? Well, that's this whole purist notion that a religion must be A or B, and people who follow it must belong to A or B. But if you actually look at people on the street, you'll have Christians talking about karma. You'll have, I don't know, people of one tradition using language and concepts from another. And so there's another movement in scholarship that says, wait a second, it's not just A or B, and we don't talk about this thing called syncretism because that's such a bad word. We talk about it as multiple religious belonging. They do this and they do this, or it's also religious hybridity. They're a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And that reflects the way people actually really are when you start looking at people's faith on the street. And it's natural for religious traditions to actually do that. Sometimes they do it intentionally, like has been mentioned in history, that churches will sometimes do things to absorb practices as a conversion strategy. Other times they don't have to do it. The people just do it on their own, and then they bring them into the new thing. And so it's always fun when you have religious traditions like that, whether it's 1,000 years ago or thousands of years in the future. And we saw this in that text. We don't want to talk about too much, Dune, where you have the Zen Sunni, and their Orange Catholic Bible. Like, you have all these things coming together. And it's actually a way of being really creative in one's religiosity, and science fiction lets you do that. It lets you play with it without being worried about a sense of is one more legitimate than the others? Like, who gives up? It's just go with it.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great analysis, and that's exactly what's happening in Hargard right now, where all of these are being forced together to see what comes out in the end of it all. A lot of different comments and questions in the chat right now. Of course, asking about the new rune magic rules.
Well, they're not part of the core book Kickstarter right now because that's again something that takes place mainly deeper into Voldrock space. There are obviously going to be some on Hardguard, but we will be getting to those rules. We will be converting them over to our new rule system, which doesn't require much conversion at all. Most people could easily just look at something and figure out how it'll work in the new rules. The examples of the psychic powers and Theurgy will do that for you. Someone asked also about previews of the rules and stuff. I'll try to get something out at some point soon that gives you a little more ideas of some of this stuff. It's just such a giant bag of stuff, and you talk about one thing, and then it always references another, and say, oh yeah, that's right, I have to explain this rule first and that rule before you get stuff. And especially with the perks, because part of the whole idea of the perks is to give you exception rules that break some of the main rules, and so on. So we'll get to those. I will simply say it because I think someone's asked about powers before. Theurgy and psychic powers and eventually rune magic. Those are handled like perks. Those are just special kind of perks that you have to have permission to get, in a sense, through certain prerequisites, like having the psi characteristic or the Theurgy characteristic. And you'll need to have victory points in your bank to be able to use those too. Not that you could use them from what you get turn to turn also, but since most of them require a victory point to activate, you're going to want to keep victory points on hand for that sort of thing. So anybody who's been watching any of the sample streams and stuff will know what I'm talking about, but hopefully I'll get some more text out there soon, because not everybody's watching those.
And I'm looking forward to the homebrew rules that pop up myself. You might not be, but I'm looking forward to them. So
there's a question about incarnates I see popped
Eddie Marcus. I like what Eddie Marcus was asking there. Before that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's something else. But the incarnates, I'll just say, are in the faction book. And they are not considered an official sect of the church, and they are considered heretical. Or at least in the kinder parts of the church might consider them heterodox and try to reach out and try to bring them in within Scripture. But for right now, no, they're not. They don't fit. Because really they're kind of a Protestant Reformation of sorts. They're telling you really don't need the patriarch and all that hierarchy. And so obviously the Orthodox Church is not going to agree with them on that.
Probably also big into literacy, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, they are somewhat. Although, really they're more charismatic than anything. It's the preceptors who are really big into...
Uh-oh. We lose the bill?
We might be.
We might be losing the patriarch. Oh no, he's being called up! He's being taken home, summoned home! You have to give more money. There we go, he's back. Oh, someone must have given money to get him back.
What?
Patriarch Oral Roberts, you froze up there for a minute. Something on your...
This might have actually been like a Sathra moment. I'm not sure.
Did you make a jump?
Sathra.
I'm back. I thought you said Mothra.
You gave away a big secret there, Ross.
Godzilla-sized secret. What I liked about Eddie Marcus's comment was asking about why didn't the church just go ahead and blockade Hargard much like they did with Ivor. And that's one of the fun things, because someone else put his foot down so they can't.
You're right. Exactly. Certain other people didn't want it blockaded. It would have taken an awful lot of church resources to blockade a world. Ivor they did because there was very clear threats, because the problem with the incarnates is they're pretty much known worlders. And so they can get in and convince people basically that their version of the religion is right. But when it comes through a Voldrock, who are considered to be raiders and barbarians and stuff, it's less of a danger. People aren't going to listen to them as much. So, and most of the Voldrock who are getting through Hargard, are the raiders. They're not sending, proselytes over to try to convert known worlders, whereas incarnates were trying to convert people.
And for game reasons also, the reason we had the church blockade Ivor was because we had so many different groups claiming it. We wanted the PCs to go in there and be able to influence who really would end up with Ivor, and have a reason why the Dakados wouldn't just send in a fleet of ships to wipe them out if they were trying to turn it over to the Zot or to the Empire or whatever else. And the church blockade handled that.
Well,
Go ahead, Bill.
plus, there's just the whole thing that, it was obviously a vow trick. So here's a new world. And then everybody fights over it, and the vow get to watch them fight over it. At least that's one of the theories.
Well, that's how they get their entertainment.
That and watching the Avesti burn people.
Yeah.
That's their soap operas. They tune in to watch the known worlders. What are they up to this week?
Well, let's talk a little about the role of religion in people's lives, both now and in the Fading Suns universe. What role does it play? Why does it still inspire such an affinity? Certainly, one of the things that happens is there are people who can seem to work miracles, even to this day in the Fading Suns, the theurgy especially.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this miraculous side that looks like evidence every day of the Pancreator's love, but you also have psychics running around. So it's not purely a religious matter. So what is it about religion that appeals to people in the Fading Suns universe?
We all need security.
Need their opiates.
Yeah.
Also, meaning making.
Yeah, that's the big thing. It gives them a sense of meaning in a pretty chaotic universe, one that's pretty spread out, that especially during the Emperor Wars, where it was changing a lot. And that's one thing we touch on in the new history that we brought up to the present day of sorts, which is that during the Emperor Wars, everybody was fighting everybody, and even the church was taking a political role in a lot of what was going on, and the common folk were kind of being screwed in all this. And one of the reactions they had was to really return to the saints big time, especially all the local saints. I mean, there've always been, recognition of saints throughout the church.
Uh-oh. He made a jump.
Church is having to edit, Bill.
For a long period. Am I coming through?
You
are
up on us again.
God.
There was another jump there.
This is twice come back from the dead.
You need a preceptor to go.
Well, this time my Sothra damper was on, so I'm safe.
But you were saying about the local saints that sometimes these are created, aren't they? Or just they're not church sanctioned, right?
Well, that's the thing. They're not canonical. Most of them aren't. They haven't been recognized. There are too many of them. And the local people love them. And the idea was they could kind of trust them when they couldn't trust, the church authorities at that point during the wars. So they kind of returned big time. Now, before then, again, they'd been recognized throughout the known worlds, saints various times. But sometimes, it wasn't a big thing. And the church prefers people to be paying more attention to their recognized officials. And the saints are a nice little background. But now they're getting a little more popular. And whether the orthodoxy, gets a little nervous at this or not, who knows? Because they haven't canonized all these guys.
Well, that's part of it. You can talk to your saint. Maybe you feel more comfortable praying to your saint than going to, Father so and so, whom you don't trust, or I don't know, you don't think he listens to you well, and
yeah. And the saint's done great things for your people at some point, or whatever.
I don't know.
But I mean, it's not an outright. I'm sorry, Jim.
I was just saying the local saints are tied to to the local history in the community. It's like, great. So there's this history happening on that planet way over there, and this famous dude way over there. But we have a person who 100 years ago did something awesome, and this is what connects us to the bigger world. This is what keeps us in. Wow, I'm looking kind of priestly like this. Sorry. This is what connects us to the faith, and so that's how these local. In history, again, that's how saints' lives and the development of saints emerges out of local community practice and recognition. Before it becomes recognized or even rejected, it starts at the local level.
There was an interesting sort of tourist angle to some saints where they would promote these things, so people would come to these villages, and that often be the village or city or town itself. Like, hey, we got.
There would be a relic there that they would want to check out. And so that's one of the big things, too, is now that we've had enough years of peace, people are starting to travel pilgrimage routes again. I mean, they did it before, but it was really dangerous, and you pretty much had to hire Brother Battle to go with you. But now, there's a lot more people cashing in on this sort of thing. And Brother Battle is, of course, stepping up because they don't have any wars, so they've got more resources to put into protecting pilgrims again, which was their original duty way back when.
And protecting their money.
Yeah, well, yes, there's that. Shh. Don't talk about such heresies.
Bill, can you talk a little bit about selecting a saint in Fading Suns?
Well, I mean, you don't really select one, but what you do is when you have a calling, what we've done is James and Rustin know because they both wrote them. There's some sample patron saints for your callings, and these aren't the only ones. They're not exclusive, and you're not like a cleric where you're not declaring this saint and having to go around, because most worshipers, they worship, at least they talk to all the saints at one time or another. Some days are saints' feast days, some days aren't, but we've given examples of some patron saints for each of the callings that we present in the new books, and some of these guys get pretty darn idiosyncratic, and they're spread out all over. And going back to the original question way back when, someone asking about Ukar religion, some of the...
Now the Ukar are censoring him.
Saint?
Yeah.
The Ukar don't want him to... The Ukar didn't want you to say that, Bill.
Shh.
They blocked your transition.
Okay. Yeah, well, some of the saints are Ukar. I said it.
But we all know that the only true saint is Saint Mantius. I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. Obviously, the patron saint of warriors. So let's talk a little bit about the role of a member of one of the religious orders in a troop. First of all, you want to talk a little bit about the 5 main religious groups, Bill, as he takes a quick slug of holy water?
Ask it again. Sorry, I missed part of it.
Let's go ahead and talk about the different official religious orders. Brother Battle, the Orthodoxy.
Yeah, the major sects in orders. Yeah, Brother Battle is obviously one of them. They're a big fighting unit. They go back to protecting pilgrims way back when, but then they had wars against Sothrists and then all sorts of other things in there. Currently, one of the major forces keeping the symbiotes from entering the known worlds, fighting on Stigmata. But they're also aided in that by the Eschatonic Order, whose theurgy proved particularly useful against symbiotes. And so they were finally begrudgingly granted a place within the church's hierarchy. And then there's also Temple of Esti, the Zealots. A lot of them love to become inquisitors. There's Sanctuary Aeon, who tend to follow Saint Amalthea and her healing ways. It's not just theurgy they do too. They have all sorts of medical technology they maintain also, and they're given a dispensation to do that. And which one am I missing now? Orthodox, of course. There you go, the main one. The guys who are still in charge, who try to be still in charge. At least they are for now. Another Orthodox priest has ascended to the patriarchy. That's Patriarch Palamon now. Then there's numerous, sects. There are the choristers, chorali, that is. And, of course, then there's the preceptors who actually teach that knowledge is good and technology can be actually used effectively and properly within a religious context.
Heretics.
There's the, incarnates, kind of again like a Protestant Reformation. Then there are the pagans. We detail those again also in the faction book. You've got the Children of Zuron. They're a sort of a star-traveling tribe. And then the Gyartans. Gyarti is more of a loose paganism that began during the Second Republic and has kind of just stuck around in different local forms throughout. And the Voldrox religion is somewhat related to it. It's probably descended from the same roots.
So let's talk about the role of religious characters in a troop. Obviously, they don't have to follow the pure stereotypes. You can have an eschatonic inquisitor. You can have an Avesti exorcist, or brother battle healer, etc., etc. So what roles do you see the priest characters playing within a troop?
It really all depends on the troop. I mean, the classic troop that is probably the most common is the noble entourage, where you're the aide to a noble. But you can also have troops that are in missions, which is pretty much led by a religious figure. So it really depends on there, but priests as a class of sorts, they're support. They're supporters. They're there to help, other souls and aid them and inspire them. And one of the ways that's represented in the rules is they all get the perk called inspiring. And that basically allows them to give their own victory points to others to spend as they need to, such as to boost their defense or whatever. So they're very giving and they're very generous. And so everybody needs to be nice to them.
Their own victories.
But, everybody's got their own little shticks. Brother Battle has an interesting thing. Now, unlike some of the others, Brother Battle is the only one we set up where to follow the calling of Brother Battle, you have to first be in the faction of Brother Battle. So, whereas all the callings for priests are interchangeable among all the different factions, Brother Battle isn't. And that one gives you access to certain, combat-style perks. But another thing Brother Battle does, and this goes back to someone asking about how the rules work, the initiative system is anybody who has an edge in initiative, which sometimes certain weapons give you an edge, certain combat maneuvers do, certain perks give you an edge, you go first. And then what happens is you then declare who goes next. And it could be one of your members of your troop, or you could declare one of the NPCs. The GM can then go next. There's also various reasons to do either. There's some tactical things going on in here. But Brother Battle have a unique little thing to where at any point, if they have not acted yet, they can interrupt the initiative order and perform a combat action. Nobles have their own little initiative shtick too, where they can, like when you've taken your action and then you nominate another person to go next, a noble at least once per scene can overrule that and choose someone else instead, even if he's not the one who acted. So everybody's got a little interesting twist they can perform rules-wise on how the game is performed among the troop.
Right. And I frankly am looking forward to a party on Hargard taking religious characters from a number of the different groups. For instance, an official representative of the Orthodox Church, someone from the Ramakrishna areas, a rune lord priest, and they all walk into a bar.
It happened here too.
Yeah, there's a great bar on Ostmark where that could actually happen.
So that is, I think that a group like that, where they're all official representatives of their factions, having to figure out if they're going to live together or kill each other off, would be
that could be fun. Someone asked what role Brother Battle, says Alaris asks what role Brother Battle characters could play when the party is not in combat. Well, they're basically there to be protectors. They're there to inspire others with their courage.
They can lend money.
Yes, they can basically protect your money. But they can also be healers too. Even though Brother Battle is a calling, and that it is exclusive to the faction, they can also take the callings of healer and theurgist.
And you can also think of them as survivalists.
They could be a combat medic, basically.
Right. You could also think of them survivalist if you're having a wilderness adventure and having to roll for random encounters every now and again, and percent chance and liar. All those parts of it. One of the things that I'm hoping to see and break their noses is the way that religion can change both over time and as it interacts with new populations. So one of the questions earlier was, how do the known worlders feel about the emperor taking a Vuldrock wife? And Alexius is the king of spin. He's the best at it. So certainly the idea came out as a celebration. The idea of the king getting married is huge and wonderful, and he's creating peace, more peace. You won't have to worry about the barbarians coming through Hargard anymore. Wonderful things. But certainly you're going to hear some chirping on the distant fringes of the town crier networks, talking about how this is a betrayal and who can trust when this is happening. So any thoughts on how this might be perceived throughout the known worlds, him marrying someone who in the past was a heretic, no matter how much she might have converted now?
Oh, and there's obviously a lot of people gearing up to use this against him and spread all sorts of rumors and foment that, barbarian lover, all that sort of thing. But, more than things he's got going for him is this seems to be so far a relatively peaceful way to expand the empire. And there's a lot of opportunity there, especially for the Merchant League and such. So there certainly seem to be leaning behind Alexius on this. And the church, again, because there's some opportunities here for, to spread the word in a more safe fashion. They seem to be cautiously more behind him. But they're probably the elements most angered at this are there's Alexius's brother, Darius Hawkwood, who doesn't like a lot of what Alexius is doing, and there's a lot of Hawkwood who feel betrayed by this because they wanted to take the crusade right to the Voldrak, and this is a way of sidestepping that. So, and there's some in the Ducados too, of course, who aren't happy and have never been, but we'll see there too what happens. I'm trying to look at the questions here.
Well,
and
for
stuff.
those who are concerned for the Emperor's own internal mirror,
some says Darius Hawkwood. I meant Alvarex Hawkwood. Excuse me.
Darius was his uncle. So,
yes.
For those who are concerned about Alexius's immortal mirror, what are they afraid? How are they afraid she might corrupt him, Rustin? What kind of Voldrak heresies might he end up embracing, either knowingly or unknowingly?
Probably the great notion of freedom might sneak in there somewhere. I don't know. There's a number of heresies that come out of the Voldrak worlds, and there's certainly a lot to choose from. And if there's any signs of sort of, worshiping local spirits or sort of universal war spirit, there's a whole bunch that could come out of that. And I'm sure Alexius won't, put a lid on it, but, it's a can of worms.
And James, there are a lot of examples in history of religions changing dramatically because of royal marriages, where a pagan married a Christian and adopted Christianity, and even vice versa in some instances. How does that affect the population?
Well, I mean, at least in the case of the areas where I'm most familiar with historically, such as in early medieval England, the conversion of the people of early medieval England was top down. You had the conversion of the king, and then the king's court, and then it worked its way down to the king's people. And oftentimes, when you had the different tribes fighting, it's like so-and-so converted, now they're Christian. They're fighting their neighbor, not just over the land, but they're also going to be like, okay, well, now we just won, and now it becomes real estate plus religion, or really real estate, and then religion just gets moved into the mix. But a lot of times it does happen at the top level. It's not so much in the Methodist language, my heart being strangely warmed at the local level. I mean, sure, that does happen in conversion, but historically, a lot of times it's just top down, either through social coercion, or in the case of like do it or die. I mean, that's a form of social coercion, but
Yeah.
Well, Freya might be bringing Christmas trees into the known worlds now.
No! The Puritans opposed those.
Well, that was how they got in England. They came from Germany through the crown and became this strange little practice. Everybody had to go now. Christmas trees all the rage.
Could you just stop with this war on Christmas?
I surrender.
So there might be some strange Voldrak customs that she's not willing to give up, and be seen at court, and other people will be going, "Oh, this is the latest fad, the latest rage. Let's do it too."
Well, okay, a little historic tidbit. When the people of Iceland were trying to decide whether to convert Christianity or maintain their same tradition, because they were seeing lots of battle, they had a national parliament in Althingi, and they talked about it. And then what happened was their chief lawgiver said, okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to convert for the peace of all the people, but we're not going to give up these individual practices. And some of them were like, exposure of infants and something about horseflesh. So they kept the local practices while claiming the religious name of what they converted to. And over time, when that happens, a practice might infiltrate and expand or might just go away. But that would be an example of that kind of religious hybridity, or bringing it in through a political conversion. So it would not surprise me if things like this happen, if these Voldrak practices suddenly become a thing that attract interest.
Right. Well, there's one fad mentioned in the Game Master book, and that's basically this deck of tarot-style cards called the Astro Divinity deck. And these were known for years to be mainly a Children of Zeron thing. You went to the local fortune teller, and they would read your fortune on these sort of things. But it turns out some of the Voldrak had these also, and Freya had a deck at the court. And once everybody saw Freya with this deck of cards, then all of a sudden everybody had to have their own, Astro Divinity deck cards. And it got to the point where now the church is commissioned to look into this and perhaps produce a deck that's actually okay theologically. But they haven't done that yet. They've just got a commission for it.
They want the copyright.
Yeah, exactly.
all through playing cards. Well, I saved my favorite topic for our last 10 minutes. And James, let's stick with you on this one. What is the role of religion in role-playing games? What?
I think of it mostly in terms of world building. I addressed some of this earlier, where I say that religion is historically part of the kind of the warp and woof of society. Historically, if we look at any society, you either have religion or a response to religion. Even if you don't have a particularly religious society, you then have how people in that society respond to religious practices. So it's a natural part of world building. I don't necessarily, I think it needs to be sophisticated in terms of, don't just make it all, all bad or all good. It has to have elements of all things. And then when you're coming up with player characters, what's their relationship to the tradition of their environment? They might, how many people in the United States today are what you would call see and ears Christmas and Easter, or hatch, match, dispatch? They've got the marriage, they got the baptism, marriage, and then funeral, but they don't really do anything else. Versus the people who are really deeply pious but haven't become priests. It's deeply part of their personality. It is one factor amongst many in terms of building society and creating your character. It doesn't have to be there, but I think that the world looks a little anemic if you don't at least kind of point at it and say what's going on. I mean, particularly in this game where it is intrinsic to the world that's been built. That's my quick soapbox.
How about you, Hezekiah the Elder, coming from your stained glass mausoleum?
He's very good with that.
Yeah. I've often been curious what religion looked like in the Second Republic when you had a very sophisticated, technological society. It must have had a very different meaning. Maybe not in very rural areas, but in some areas it must have had a very different form. And the fact that the Universal Church survived that, watched it crash, and come out of that still intact, out of a very sophisticated, and you imagine probably a very, I don't know if it'd be intellectual society, but, one that was much higher than the sort of space medieval one that we find ourselves in, Fading Suns. And I sort of wonder how it survived, or not survived, but how it altered and changed from the Second Republic and then came down to its present area, present point.
Well, it would be something very interesting to explore further when we can finally get around to detailing the Second Republic more, as in letting people play in it. That'd be great.
Some of the fun things we
see. I'm just going to say that I always felt the role of religion role-playing was to bring souls to Satan.
There's a chick comic about you.
Oh, goodness. Recorded for posterity.
There you go. I'm not the first to say that. Blackleaf!
Oh, my gosh, that classic chick comic. Yeah, and what I like about it is the ability to explore religion from an outside perspective. In our society, we are so intimately caught up in religion, it's hard to have a a neutral perspective on it, whether you're an adherent or not. And one of the best ways to explore religion more objectively is to be able to take the role of a different character and take on their mindset about it, just like we do with a lot of other topics. But religion more so than most, because it has this miraculous element, which lends itself so nicely to games like D&D and In Nomine. And we have then this societal element and this obvious role in the party of healer, of confidant, of advisor, and so forth. And just that ability to look at our own religions from an outsider perspective. There's an old, I don't want to say it's a cliche in science fiction, but it's been used a lot, which is the aliens come down and evaluate humans from their own perspective, and how they view religion is always interesting, because the aliens, for some reason, always seem to be atheistic and are looking at religion as what is this weird things that humans have adopted and why. So it's interesting to also do that as a believer and look at religions in an intelligent way. So that's my soapbox for religion in games. And that way we get all the religious books into people's hands in a whole new way. We can crib all our resources from the Bible. Like, it was always funny writing Fading Suns, especially the Brother Battle book, just going through various religious texts and cribbing the best quotes and translating them into Brother Battle speak. You'll see that in a lot of the books. Always a fun way to dig into religion myself. There.
I mean, of course, Brother Battle misunderstands everything. it's the eschatonics who. Anyway, sorry.
Kelly Falugula has a great point about role-playing in the hidden god. Elohim, that's one of the names of God in Hebrew. It's a plural word, signifies the troop. And the GM is in the demiurge. We're going Gnostic in chat.
Uh-oh.
Oh, you Gnostic Christians. And, of course, Chainsaw Gothic had to talk about Black Elf more. You have the real power now. And onward. All right, so we are 3 minutes away from being done with it. We'll go ahead and entertain some more comments and questions from chat, but I'll turn it over to our panelists for any last thoughts on religion and gaming in the Fading Suns.
I'll talk actually real quickly about just religion and science fiction for two totally different approaches. Compare C.S. Lewis's approach to science fiction and The Martian Chronicles with Ray Bradbury, and look at how religion plays two completely different roles, particularly in terms of colonialism and going to other planets. Take a look at that. It's really interesting because it shows different ways of dealing with that in a social setting.
And very much reflecting their author's own mindsets.
Yes. The Episcopalian and the Unitarian, right.
Interesting.
Or, sorry, the Anglican.
Hezekiah the Elder, any last thoughts?
Well, I think it's what you want to do with it when you're role-playing. I mean, you can commit your character totally to it, or it could be just background world building. So it's there, and it's how you want to react to it. There's no one's forcing you to jump into it, but if you really want to immerse yourself, the material's out there. So.
And Bill, when can we expect a Fading Suns-based chick track?
We're all waiting.
Didn't we already had the Goofus and Gallant version for the Vestites way back when?
Mm-hmm. To show
what
you
was they? Constantius and Constultius, I think. Caligula will have to weigh in on that. He wrote it. So yeah. So maybe.
Sir Alaris wants to know what's the state of religion on Rampart. Lee Halan inflicting it on the guild.
When we revisit Rampart in detail, we'll get to see, but it's still a somewhat, embattled world, in that it's hard to convince the residents there to toe the line in the way the Lee Halan want.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was Natty Marcus' question and not a Sir Alaris question. About Rampart. Exactly. All right. Well, we are now officially at 6 p.m. Eastern Orthodox time. So thanks to our special guest, the ghost of Hezekiah the Elder, Saint Hieronymus the Unmentionable, and of course the patriarch himself.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Buddy Hieronymus.
Somebody please share the Kickstarter link in chat, even though I think everyone in there has already backed it. But if someone should have gotten Robert to have done it. Yay, Eddie. We appreciate all of you, and we look forward to our last one of these. Maybe we'll do one more after, but I think our last one during the Kickstarter is next Tuesday.
And what's the topic?
You tell us.
Yeah, you tell us. Comment in the Kickstarter chat and let us know what you want us to talk about. And with that, thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.